Hey. Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. All right?
All right.
You got a dream, you got to protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it. Period.
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. What is up, successful dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Patrick Stoddart. Patrick started his first company, Red Alerts, at age 17. It was a software platform to ease and enhance event scheduling and communications at schools, churches, and governments. A few years later, he co-founded PhonetoAction, where he builds tools that help nonprofits and companies activate and engage their supporters to be part of the civic process. You can read more about PhonetoAction in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and we will also post more links in the show notes. So Patrick, man, that's the intro I have for you, but tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for having me today. I'm really glad to have the chance to share a little bit of my background, and hopefully it's helpful for people. So a little bit about kind of, I guess, where I am today, and then we can talk through some of the story. But today I'm working as a co-founder and a VP of product at PhonetoAction, as you mentioned. So I started the company with two others about 4 years ago, and have taken on a variety of different roles in that process, leading product development as chief technology officer, and actually built out the initial version of our product, and then took on a role building out our product engineering teams and kind of transitioned more to a role managing and growing those teams. And then today I am focusing more on the product side of things, and the sort of strategic vision for the product for the company, and making sure that we're executing on that day to day.
Okay, so how many years ago did you launch PhonetoAction?
So we started the company just about 4 years ago now. It was right around when Obama got elected, or reelected. That's how I always remember it. But
Gotcha.
Yeah, it was about 4 years ago, and we launched. We had sort of this time 4 years ago, we had sort of an initial prototype that it was actually built out at a startup weekend in Las Vegas, believe it or not, and we signed a few contracts with that with some initial clients, and we work with like nonprofits, trade associations, companies. Anybody that has sort of an audience, a customer base, a supporter base, or whatnot to engage and to mobilize for change, for social change. And so we sold our first few contracts on the prototype that we had, and then about the first year with PhonetoAction was sort of a time of learning to sort of building the plane while we're flying it, so to speak.
Right.
And we actually rebuilt and built a more comprehensive platform that wasn't just sort of a prototype, but actually matured the product quite a bit, took it ahead several steps, and allowed us to continue to innovate going forward, which is what we've continued doing, obviously. But that was sort of the first major build out. And then early 2013, we launched, or rather early 2014, we launched the PhonetoAction platform, upon which the development that has followed has continued until today.
Okay, so explain to myself and those listening exactly what the mechanics of it are. I'm on the website here. It says social media, phone, and email advocacy tools that drive the participation in the civic process. So what does that actually look like for somebody that's using the product?
Yeah, so let me give you, let me answer that question with kind of an example.
Yeah.
So one of the partners that we work with, I think we show on the website, the American Heart Association, but one other partner that we work with actually has us embedded into their app. It's Lyft. So if you think about, let's say you take a Lyft ride in Chicago or Austin or San Francisco or wherever, and let's say that they are fighting regulations, local regulations in whatever city they're operating in. You get to the end of that ride, they may send you a push notification that says, hey, thanks for using Lyft. We see that you enjoyed the ride. Here's an opportunity to tell your local mayor or city council member that you care about Lyft and that you that you use it and want to be able to keep having access to the service. And so by opening that push notification, they can direct you to sort of a pre-populated message and ask you to tell your story via email to the lawmakers that represent you at your home address, or you can tweet at them, post on their Facebook walls, or actually initiate what's called a patch-through call. So you're actually connected directly with your elected representatives' offices to advocate for that cause.
Huh. That is fascinating. So what's kind of the success rate there as far as, how many causes that you've been able to push through that you would say are kind of a direct result of this?
Yeah, so it's hard to say exactly the number on that. We're always compiling that. It's kind of an ongoing thing. Right. And even so, it is difficult to show causation, right? With anything like this, it's a whole variety of factors that really move the needle. But what I will say is we've worked on tens of thousands of campaigns and had a major impact on a lot of different issues. One in particular that comes to mind is it's actually maybe on our website as well, because we're really proud of this one. The American Heart Association has been pushing or had been pushing for several years, I think over a decade, a CPR in Schools Act in New York State. And that was a bill that would have required teachers to undergo CPR education should there be an incident in their classroom, and be able to address that while first responders make their way to the school. And they had tried for, like I said, over about a decade to get this thing passed, and it didn't ever make it through. And AHA launched on PhonetoAction a really compelling campaign targeting state assembly members and senators, as well as the governor's office via patch-through calls and then on social media using PhonetoAction's tools. And they showcased a few parents' personal stories that had sort of real experience with where they or their children would have benefited or their lives may have been saved by having this sort of education. And so having that really impactful personal message really struck a chord with AHA's supporters and mobilized lots and lots of people to contact the State House there in New York, and ultimately it passed. And so it's stories like that. We see them every day. We hear from advocates and from our partners every day on causes that are having similar successes. And so, we don't try to claim causation per se, but we're very happy with the rate of success that our partners enjoy.
Yeah, no kidding. Have you ever seen the show Parks and Rec?
Yeah.
I feel like your tool right here is like the death of kind of what that show is about, or kind of because I always view, and they make fun of the, government and civic programs and just the angst and pain and the length of time it takes to really push anything meaningful through. And so this seems like an incredible solution.
Certainly.
Yeah. So how I'm curious, how did you come up with the idea?
So I actually can't take credit for coming up with the idea for PhonetoAction. It's actually one of my co-founders who worked in advocacy for some time and sort of experienced this sort of the problem of mobilizing supporters or getting them engaged to contact their elected officials while out in the field doing her grassroots organizing, and was unable to find at the time in 2012 any sort of tools on the market that would make that process easier. And use things like social media and phone calls and mobile technologies, text messaging and things like that we use now to be able to mobilize supporters. And so she had the initial idea, and I was fortunate enough to meet her early on and be able to pitch in on the technology side.
And what's kind of the plan for the future, sort of the long-term, any long-term goals you have for it?
Yeah, so we are. We're aggressively scaling. We're sort of in scaling mode right now. We just raised a Series A round of financing, $4.7 million back in July of 2016, and so we have put the gas pedal all the way down, so to speak, since then. And so, really, our focus is really to be heads down over the next several months and to build out. We're aggressively expanding the team and the operation just in general, looking at what's next. We're always looking at what's next in the industry and in technology, in the tech industry in general, and bringing that application to advocacy. Yeah, all kinds of great things on the horizon.
Yeah, could you briefly explain how you monetize?
Yeah, so we work with, we have a B2B business SaaS model. So we work with, like I said, nonprofits, trade associations, some companies to enhance, their sort of grassroots advocacy initiatives that they already have in place. And so they're paying a licensing fee to have access to the service. So it's free for everyday citizens to use, for the advocates and the lawmakers to receive messages and so on. So it's the organizations, the advocacy groups that are funding our company, and that in turn are able to offer this service to their supporters. Gotcha.
Awesome. Yeah, I see here on the bottom of the website you've got, of course, American Heart Association, Lyft, Ford. Yeah, that's awesome, man. So Patrick, let's go back in time, and I want you to tell us your dropout story and what kind of led to that decision.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, actually, and kind of all around the Midwest, but for the most part there.
All those flyover states.
Yeah, all the flyover states. And I graduated high school in 2010, went to a public high school there in suburban Kansas City. And then at the time, it was between my junior and senior years of high school that I had the idea for what came to be my first company. And actually had a prototype running my senior year. And since ultimately what the business ended up doing was selling into K-12 and a lot of educational institutions, it was actually something that our school used my senior year. So I treated that sort of like a pilot year, kind of a testing ground.
Was this Red Alerts?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
And so it was really just figuring a lot of things out about technology, about business, about just kind of getting started my senior year of high school. And when I graduated, I had a lot of interest from a lot of other schools and other districts and other types of organizations to use this technology product in their organizations. And so I started kind of selling into these, actually formed the business and so on. But I decided that fall that I still wanted to go off to college, I think for the most part because it felt like sort of what you do, right? I mean, it just sort of felt a routine, I guess, in a way. It just felt like the natural next step
absolutely.
From my life, because I saw my peers all doing the same thing. And so I didn't want to leave the area, so I went to a state school locally, actually across the state line in Kansas. and attended there. I was actually there for 2 years. And enjoyed it for the most part, but I did feel that, and I suspect a lot of undergrads feel this way the first couple years of school, regardless. But I didn't particularly feel challenged in the environment I was in, and it was something I didn't realize how much I needed that. I found everybody that I was hanging out with in school, was worried about the upcoming tests or the assignments or applying for scholarships or grant money or things like that. I was doing all that, but then I was going to sales pitches and presenting to superintendents and deans at universities in the area and in pitching to investors and things like that. And it just felt it felt off to me, I guess. I felt so much more stimulated and interested when I was doing my own work outside of school, and just felt like I was learning so much more. I was putting into practice already the things that were supposed to be part of the degree program, and surely would have been. So about midway through my second year, my sophomore year in school, it's funny. I think I just kind of realized one day that I wanted to give this a try on my own and leave. It was also, not coincidentally, around the same time that I started to get to know some folks at the Teal Foundation. And if you know anything about the Teal Foundation and the Teal Fellowship, they very much put a premium on holistic learning over formal education. They're not by any means, advocating solely for people to just drop out or leave school. Rather, a much more, they take a much more sort of individualized approach to somebody's learning and recognize that sometimes a four-year university isn't the best solution for people. And that at the time, especially, and still does, really resonated with me. And so I just kind of decided one day, and I talked to my parents about it, and I'm a very type A person, and so I actually wrote up a whole plan, and I did revenue projections for myself. It was kind of silly looking back on it.
But it helped with the convincing process, though.
I talked to my mom about it, and there was, there's no issue there. I was a little more concerned about talking to my dad about it, and so I remember I went in with this whole printout and spreadsheet and all this stuff, and at the end of it, he was like, well, okay, you've made your case, so they were always supportive. So
right.
And so I decided to finish out that semester, which made it a clean 2 years, and then kind of moved back home and kind of went from there.
So based on your experience with your parents, telling them about the experience and putting together your spreadsheets, explaining everything, that seemed to work. Is there any additional advice you'd give to anybody listening on how to handle that communication with their parents on, if they've decided to drop out? Because that's one of the main questions that we get here on the show. It's a big deal.
I mean, this goes for a lot of things in life, but I think that in general, when you're facing a decision like this, or maybe you've made a decision like this, make a plan and understand that things will change and things won't go according to plan, most likely. But make a plan and just be prepared for, be prepared to be able to stick up for your decision, and to have sort of some reasonable sense for why you're doing what you're doing, and why it's a better option than staying in college. I think that nowadays, certainly in tech, I think there's this sort of idea that dropping out of college is sexy, or that it's some sort of backwards credential, almost like it means you think you're too smart for college or something. And I don't think it's that at all. I think that when you're thinking about something like this, the prospect of leaving, I think it's best to really think critically about it and to try and make sure you understand everything you're giving up by doing that. I think that if you have an immediate, so in my case, if you have an immediate idea like I did, or something that's actually generating revenue for you, which I did at the time, and you feel like that thing can't wait, then you can always come back to college. And that was kind of what I rested on with my parents too, is maybe I'll come back. I can come back in a couple years if I try this and it doesn't work out, but I can't ever come back to this idea. And so I think that just approaching it realistically and understanding that there is certainly value in a formal education, certainly in some fields more than others, I think, but there's certainly a value to it, but there's also value to the social aspect of it. And that was something that of going to a university, and that was something that I didn't spend a ton of time thinking about, and which was tough from time to time. But I think that it's just best to show that you've thought all these things through and be able to present a sort of well-rounded case for why it's the best thing for you personally.
Right. Now, you mentioned that Red Alerts was already generating some revenue and stuff like that. So I imagine you had some sort of savings you would have been able to support yourself, leaving college.
Yeah. Well, and at the time also I had the advantage of, which if you at all are in the, if you're listening and at all are in the position to capitalize on this, I would say do it. The advantage of being able to move home with parents and not have to deal with the rent payment.
Oh yeah.
Right away. And so, I didn't abuse that privilege. I was there for about 6 months, decided I was bored out of my mind, and moved into my own place. But it was a nice sort of safety blanket, and a time during which I could feel free to sort of experiment with the idea that I'd come up with and the business I was starting to grow. And so I think there's a lot of value in having that flexibility.
Yeah. What would you say one of your biggest fears was in leaving college, and how did you manage that? I
think there was sort of like the norm breaking piece to it that was kind of intimidating. The idea that nobody else around me was making such a decision, and certainly not for the same reasons. And so there was this idea that I'm kind of writing my own story that was both exciting and scary. I think the easy answer to that question would be like a fear of failure, or a fear that things wouldn't pan out the way you expected them to in some way. I don't actually think I was really afraid of that, and it's not to say I haven't been at other times, but I think at the time I really truly thought this, I just had this strong feeling that like this is not where I want to be or where I need to be right now, and that if I go out into the world and I focus on this 100% and this thing crashes and burns and just turns into a total dumpster fire, I can come back to school. I can figure it out. I can reboot it. I can start something new. There are always other options. And I think that's important to remember in anything, not to, stick with something that you don't enjoy because you feel like you're out of options. And I think that, for me, the idea of failing at what I was working on didn't really seem to inhibit that decision. And so I think, I think it was just the idea that I was sort of doing something out of the ordinary a bit, and having to stand behind that decision.
Yeah, I mean, did you get much flack from your friends at all making that decision and moving forward?
No, to be honest, I got some reactions like, I'm surprised it took this long. So, especially a lot of people that knew me in high school, I was, I was plenty social and had plenty of friends, but I was also like that kid that built the communications platform that we're using as seniors in high school. And, that's a fairly unusual thing.
Right.
And so people kind of knew that. And I think kind of in a way, and like I said, the idea of dropping out of college for somebody in tech is like this sort of sexy notion. And so I think that, externally people kind of saw it that way. I think it's dangerous for, any young person who's thinking about doing that, to make their decision based on something like that. But I think that like externally, people almost kind of expected it, I guess, which is kind of odd. But at least certainly people my age.
Right, right. So now moving a little bit more into your entrepreneurial journey, what would you consider to be your worst entrepreneurial moment to date? Can you tell us that story?
I think one of the toughest things for me was right around when I went off to school. I spent about 9 months maybe trying to figure out what I was doing with this business and what I wanted to do with it, and struggled with that quite a bit. And I didn't have much of a sort of mentor network or just a network of other entrepreneurs to talk to kind of figure out some of the problems that I was facing, the challenge I was facing, that anyone would face
right.
with a tiny but growing business. Certainly somebody who's a first-time entrepreneur just trying to figure it out. And I don't think I did the greatest job of seeking out help on that, on my challenges when I needed it. I finally did, and I actually got connected with a group called the Pipeline Entrepreneur Fellowship. It's a regional fellowship for Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska for entrepreneurs, high-growth entrepreneurs in those states, to get connected and sort of immediately be part of a family of a little over 100 people who have been through. They sort of do a year-long program, and then you become part of this family and are introduced to a absolutely fantastic network of mentors and people who have been down this road before and learned a lot of lessons. And so that provided a lot of value in my journey. But I think until then, I spent, I say 6 to 9 months, but maybe even longer than that. I spent a good amount of time kind of spinning my wheels and like not really sure what direction I wanted to take things. And I think for me, again, I feel like really life sort of started and everything sort of started once I made the decision to leave school and focus on that. And I had much more of a sense of direction, and I knew more people through the Teal Fellowship and through my local sort of network, and I learned the value of that. And so I think it's not a terribly specific example, but I think that I think the failure there was just kind of isolating myself, which is an easy thing to do when you're starting something on your own. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And so, are you more of an introvert then?
Oh, I don't know. I think of myself as one. And I think my Myers-Briggs puts me like just a little bit on the introvert side, but most people I know, I say that to, and they kind of roll their eyes. So I don't know. I'm somewhere in the middle, probably.
Or you just like to work, so you'll kind of shut yourself up and.
Yeah, I think I tend to, and this is I think a challenge for anybody that starts a company and certainly sees the product as their baby. I tend to value or enjoy personally individual work more than like team or group work, and that can sometimes lead to a problem delegating things. And I think that's a common challenge for people, like I said, that are starting something new on their own. But yeah, I think that I think the bigger challenge is just it's easy, unless you get plugged into a network in your area, it's easy to isolate yourself because every challenge you encounter feels like you're the only person that's going through this, and you're the only person that has ever gone through this, regardless of what it is. If it's just getting incorporated, or maybe you're getting sued, or maybe you've just landed a big contract but you don't have a product to offer yet, or you name it. And somebody's been there, and you would, I think, be surprised by people's capacity for wanting to help. Certainly young in age entrepreneurs, but also just people who are new to entrepreneurship, to try and lift them up. So, I think it's less of a personality thing, personally, I think, than it is just a common characteristic of people who start things completely new and assume they're the only person doing that.
Yeah. No, I can definitely relate. So how about on the flip side, more of an aha moment that you've experienced where, I don't know, something happened, or you talked to somebody, or you had an experience, and all of a sudden something clicked in your mind, and you looked at things differently from that point on?
Oh, I have these moments all the time. I think that one key moment was early on with working with PhonetoAction. I am passionate about advocacy, about grassroots advocacy. I was before I joined PhonetoAction, and still am today, certainly. But my like professional background, what little of it there was, did not consist of anything advocacy related. So I didn't really directly have experience in that space, and so it was a bit. And I saw the applicability of the idea and what we were building and everything, but it really drove it home for me the first few times that we presented our product and our at the time our prototype, but then even what we were building. We started to present this to some of our prospective customers, like in sales demos. And early on, I was a part of a lot of those, and have continued to be less so, but have continued to be as well. And getting in front of an actual customer, somebody who's making a decision on whether to buy this thing that you've built or not, and watching them react positively and just be amazed by something that you've built, and seeing their sort of enthusiasm for the work that you're doing, and then ultimately closing that deal. I think that sort of cemented for me what I already kind of figured was the value that we were providing as a company and as a software company, and but it really drove it home, to see people actually be willing to pay for whatever it is that you're offering. May seem on the surface like a simple thing, but it's real traction, and it's a real proof point, and it should feel good. Like it should be thing that's really informative and helps move you forward. And so I think I had that same moment with my first company. I remember being asked to come up with pricing for my first sales meeting, and I was like a 17-year-old kid, and I had no idea what to price this thing at, so I made up a number. I'm sure my first customer would love hearing that, but made up a number more or less, and walked in there and sold it. And so that sort of experience really kind of changes your perspective and your outlook on things. It makes you really realize that you've got something real there.
Yeah, no kidding. What a phenomenal feeling. Patrick, what advice, speaking of your 17-year-old self, what advice do you think you would give your 17, 18-year-old Patrick in the past?
I don't have any regrets around either going to school for the time that I did or leaving school when I did. I think that having that experience was valuable, and the experience of leaving was valuable. Like I think there was, I got something out of each of those experiences. I perhaps maybe wouldn't have stayed in school quite as long as I did if I could go back. Mm-hmm. I think, though, the biggest thing is just getting started earlier on, getting plugged into the tech community, which at the time in my area was really just getting started too. So, it's gotten a lot easier nowadays, I think. But I think not wasting any time and getting connected to that, and taking more of a long-term and bigger picture view, and setting my goals as even higher than I did. Right. One example that comes to mind of that is I actually presented. I pitched at a fundraising conference. It was a bunch of they get a bunch of investors into a conference hall, and invite 13 entrepreneurs to go up on stage and give them the opportunity to present annually. And so I was one that was selected for it, and I went up and pitched, and My fundraising ask was some amount of money for some amount of ownership, and I had projected, this was my first company, and I had projected revenues out at 12, 24 months or something, 24 months, and I'd said, yeah, after 24 months, next year we'll have closed like $150,000 in deals or something like that. It was some like terribly low number for the amount of funding I was asking for, and I I was thinking that way, and I had priced things low for the customers, but to me it was a lot of money, and I wasn't really thinking of it that way. And I remember that one of the first investors that took an interest came to me and kind of threw out all the silly revenue projections I'd come up with, and he said, "Tell me how much money you need to get to like $5 million in revenue in 2 years instead of this 100 something thousand that you just projected." And I almost had a heart attack when he said that. But it was, it was like moments like that made me realize that I had something real again, and that I needed to treat it that way, and to zoom out and think bigger, and really, place those projections higher than I did. So.
Yeah. Love it, man. So Patrick, you're a Teal Fellowship ambassador. You know Dropouts, people that stayed in school. You went to school for a couple of years, and then you've done the Dropout thing. You're an entrepreneur. In your opinion, and based on your experience, who do you think what kind of person do you think should drop out? And what kind of person do you think should probably stay in school?
So I think you want to. So I don't think that there's like a universal template for who should drop out, right? But I think that if you are deciding to drop out, or you're thinking about it, you want to, I think, make sure that you're enough of and just know yourself and be honest with yourself. If you're disciplined enough and you're enough of a self-starter to not squander an opportunity. Certainly if you're dropping out from like a really good school, you want to really make sure that whatever you're going to, that you have some sort of a plan, and that you're not going to waste a ton of time, kind of just doing nothing, right? That you're dropping out for the right reasons, and that that you'll be able to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and make yourself some degree of successful, however you define that. I think, a good option if you're on the fence for a lot of people is taking a gap year. I know several people who have done gap years either between high school and college, or during college, or even a gap semester or something, and take some time for self-discovery. I think that's totally fair. I think, that may have been something, if I had approached things differently, that may have actually been a good, or maybe even a better solution for me. And so I think there's a lot of value in even 1 or 2 gap years. I think the people that, I personally tend to think that if you're going out to, and you intend to start and run the company, and you intend to do, wear a lot of different hats, and you're okay with the startup, you're comfortable and enjoy a startup environment, then I think that's fine. I think the people that need to certainly weigh more heavily the benefits that come with staying in school are going to be people that like want to go and actually be software engineers by trade, right? That don't necessarily want to like found something, or maybe they want to found something, but eventually like really what they enjoy more is writing code, or they they want to do something that requires a lot of sort of defined hard skills. They want to go into accounting or something like that. And maybe they want to work at a startup or even found a startup, but eventually like maybe they, what they enjoy the most is not running a company or managing people or big picture, high level things like that, but they actually enjoy writing code and building products. And I think, something I recognize about myself early on as well, I enjoy that to an extent. It's not 100% of what I want to do. I want to have a more holistic role. It's why I've floated more toward product and enjoy product development more, because there's sort of all these different disciplines that you're able to meld together and manage through that type of a role. But I'm not coding every day. I'm not sitting down for 8 hours, 10 hours a day writing code like somebody that's purely a software engineer does. And for those types of positions, I certainly think that a CS degree is a major asset. I certainly know that even myself hiring people, if you come in with a CS degree, you're going to be a lot more attractive candidate than somebody that doesn't. So I do think there's still a lot of value in that. For that type of a role.
What about, and just to go into this super quick, when you're hiring somebody, say somebody comes to you and they've got a CS degree, and then say somebody comes to you and they're just like that other candidate in every way, except they don't have a degree, but maybe they've created a couple really cool apps and they've already kind of provided a lot of value to the world. You can see projects they've actually worked on. What's kind of your thoughts on the difference there, and who would you be more likely to look at?
I will take experience over education every day of the week. So if you can demonstrate that you have, if I have a candidate that can demonstrate self-starting ability and that has taken initiative and owned something and built something from nothing, I don't care if they have a degree, that is a more attractive candidate to me. As opposed to somebody who maybe got a degree and has held sort of not status quo jobs, but it has held sort of normal jobs where, they're coming in 9 to 5 or something, and they're, building on a product that was already there. Not that there's anything wrong with that candidate, and maybe they're an expert in their field. I personally, as I'm building out a team, I'm going to look for self-starting people because they're going to seek to learn every single thing they can. They're going to teach themselves everything they can. They're going to teach others everything they can. They're going to be the ones that are motivated and want to help lead a team, I think, in the long run. And ultimately, they're the people that you want around to help shape the culture of your company, which is a really important thing. And I think there's definitely a place for the other, but my instinct would be to go for the experience over the education in that type of a scenario. But I do think, though, that people that don't have that formal education need to understand that they need to be able to demonstrate that. It needs to be demonstrable experience and not just light items on a resume. You need to be able to talk to me about it. You need to be able to show what you've built and what you've done and the impact that that's ultimately had and why you did that and why you didn't go to school maybe. And I think as long as you can present a solid case for that, I think it's fine.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So we're getting a little low on time here, but really quick, do you read much? And if you do, would you recommend any books to us?
I don't as much as I would like, to be quite honest. I just need to make more time for it. But I would say, so I like a lot of like the O'Reilly books that are very specific, almost like not like textbook style, I guess, but on a particular subject having to do with what I'm working on. So, again, like being self-taught when it comes to building out a product management function and a product organization within a company, I've got to kind of learn what the best practices are. Mm-hmm. And so I seek a lot of those out. I've been learning about sort of in a more advanced way, everything from user story mapping and formal definitions of Scrum, which we've been using for several years now, but actually like putting some walls around that, to like scaling SQL databases to massive levels, just learning everything I can on that side of things. So I enjoy books around that. The O'Reilly books are always a good resource on that. Yeah. Recently reread Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs. I actually was out at, it's funny enough, I was out at the North American International Auto Show over the past weekend and actually had a chance to see Walter Isaacson speak there and host a couple panels, which was pretty cool at an auto show of all places. But anyhow, I always find that I enjoy biographies, especially of people who are leaders in technology and in business, and I think there are a lot of lessons that you can take from that, from learning about other people's lives like that, and so it's always one that I enjoy.
Now, how about any internet resources you recommend, kind of like Evernote?
Yeah, so a little bit of every. I mean, so I follow a ton of blogs on Medium that are always really interesting to me. I spend way too much time on Quora. That one's probably a little bit less constructive time, but the Medium stuff I find really interesting. I follow a lot of like what I would call influencers in my space. So even if they're both public and private sector. So like I live in DC, in Washington DC now. I follow a lot of people at 18F, and hearing about what they're doing on the civic tech front to innovate within government, just as we're trying to innovate outside of government, and groups like that. And then I follow people at companies that I admire, like or companies with products that I admire, like Intercom or Envision or Twilio or places like that. So I'd say a lot of that. There's one that a site that I've been frequenting quite a bit more lately, called Mind the Product. It's actually a site out of the UK, but it's all about product management, product development, best practices, and thoughts on that. So yeah,
Mind the Product, MIND.
Yeah,
Mind the Product.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're getting down to our last two questions here. Just really quick, Patrick, do you have any parting advice for any of our listeners who are, let's say they're self-starters and they're thinking of dropping out of college, but they haven't quite made that step yet?
I think the best thing is to be really to try and understand yourself as much as you can, and the options that you have at your disposal, and to be clear and honest with yourself about what you expect to get out of either staying in school or leaving school, and at least a general idea of how you plan to get there, right? So going back to how I answered one of your first questions, it was sort of forming a plan and being able to follow that. But set yourself some goals, see if you can make them. Don't undervalue the time that you have in school when maybe you have a scholarship or some grant money, or maybe you don't, but maybe you have some of that, and you're fortunate enough to be able to have blocks of time while you're in school where you don't have the pressure of a ton of bills coming in, and you don't have all of the sort of adult responsibilities, so to speak, quite yet. And so that's actually really valuable time to build a company if you try and flip it a little bit and think of it that way. Totally. But at the same time, if you've got something that is really just exploding in growth, and you're maybe hopefully making some money at it already, and you see a much bigger opportunity for it, if you were to leave and be able to devote more time to it, then I think just set some goals, set some plans, and see where it goes.
Cool, man. Well, what's the best way that people can connect with you, Patrick?
I don't know if you can share like my site, my Twitter handle is probably the easiest. My email address is actually up on my site, so that's probably the easiest way to do it. But would love to connect with anyone that is kind of going through this and trying to figure out what to do, and want some advice on that. I'm more than happy to chat.
And your personal website URL is what again?
It's PrStoddart, STODDART.com.
Awesome. Well, Successful Dropouts, you've been hanging out with Patrick and Kylan, learning what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. For everything we talked about today, over to successfuldropout.com and type Patrick into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish. Successful Dropouts, if you could go to iTunes and leave a positive rating and review, it would help this show out a lot. I know you're busy, I know you got a lot going on, but if you do that, it helps this podcast rank, it helps other people listen to it and gain value just like you have been. Thank you so much in advance. Also, a couple weeks ago, I sent out an email to you guys asking for more ratings and reviews, and you guys responded. So right now I want to give a shout out to Bo Wilkinson, Beast of Nature, awesome screen name, and Daniel Neiman. Thank you so much for the 5-star review. And as you guys leave reviews, I'll try to give you a shout out at the end of these episodes as my thank you to you.